The crack of my sister's palm against my 5-year-old daughter's face echoed through our Christmas morning like a gunshot, and before I could even process what had happened, my FBI agent husband was already reaching for his badge, his voice cold as winter steel. "Vanessa, you just committed assault on a minor in front of a federal agent. You have the right to remain silent." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Elena Hartwell, and if you're watching this, stay with me, because what happened that Christmas morning in our Millbrook home didn't just destroy our family traditions. It revealed truths that had been festering beneath the surface for years, truths that would ultimately lead to handcuffs, court dates, and a sister who thought blood meant she could cross any line without consequences. Have you ever watched someone you love reveal who they truly are in a single moment of rage? Have you ever seen family bonds shatter so completely that the law becomes the only language left to speak? December 25th started like every other Christmas at our house on Willowbrook Lane. The smell of cinnamon rolls filled the kitchen, wrapping paper scattered across the hardwood floors like colorful snow, and my daughter Lily bouncing between her new toys with that pure Christmas morning joy that makes all the preparation worth it. My husband Trevor was in his element, playing Santa with his nieces and nephews, his federal badge forgotten for the day as he became Uncle Trevor, the man who could make coin tricks appear behind little ears and somehow always knew exactly which present each child wanted most. But then Vanessa arrived. My sister had always been the storm cloud at family gatherings, the one who found fault in every arrangement, every meal, every attempt at holiday cheer. She walked into our living room like she owned it, designer heels clicking against the floor, surveying the scene with that familiar look of disapproval that had been her signature expression since we were children. She was late, as always, but expected the same warm welcome as everyone else who had been helping since dawn. "Elena, this place is chaos," she announced, stepping over scattered toys without so much as acknowledging the children who were playing with them. "Don't you think Lily is getting a bit too worked up? She's being disruptive." Disruptive. That was Vanessa's word for any child who dared to act like a child in her presence. My 5-year-old daughter was laughing, playing with her cousins, being exactly what a little girl should be on Christmas morning, and somehow that was offensive to my sister's sensibilities. I should have seen it coming. The signs were all there. The way Vanessa's jaw tightened when Lily shrieked with delight over her new dollhouse, the way her eyes narrowed when the kids got a little loud during present opening, the way she kept checking her phone and sighing dramatically like she had somewhere more important to be. But it was Christmas, and I was trying so hard to keep the peace, to maintain the family harmony that had always been my responsibility as the younger sister, the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over Vanessa's rough edges so everyone else could enjoy themselves. Trevor noticed it too. I caught him watching my sister with that analytical gaze that made him so good at his job, the way he studied suspects and witnesses, cataloging behavior patterns, noting inconsistencies. Later, he would tell me he had been concerned about her agitation level, the way she was escalating over minor disruptions that any reasonable adult would understand were normal childhood behavior. The breaking point came during present opening. Lily had just unwrapped an art set from her grandmother, one of those elaborate cases filled with crayons, markers, colored pencils, and sketch pads that every creative 5-year-old dreams of. She was so excited she could barely contain herself, spinning around with the case clutched to her chest, thanking everyone in that breathless way children do when they receive something that feels like pure magic. In her excitement, she bumped into Vanessa's purse, knocking it off the coffee table. Nothing broke, nothing spilled, just a gentle bump that sent the designer bag sliding a few inches across the hardwood. Any normal person would have laughed it off, maybe playfully scolded her to be more careful, certainly wouldn't have reacted like my sister did. "Lily," Vanessa's voice cut through the Christmas morning joy like a blade. "Look what you did. That bag costs more than most people make in a month. You need to learn to control yourself." The room went quiet, not the comfortable quiet of a peaceful morning, but the tense silence that happens when everyone suddenly realizes they're witnessing something that shouldn't be happening. My daughter's face fell, her excitement crumbling into confusion and shame. She looked at me with those wide brown eyes, not understanding why she was being yelled at for what was clearly an accident. "Vanessa, she's 5, I said quietly, moving toward Lily to comfort her. "It was an accident. The bag is fine." But my sister was already worked up, already past the point of reason that I recognized from our childhood. This was Vanessa in full control mode, the version of her that needed to dominate every situation, to make sure everyone knew she was the authority in the room. "That's the problem, Elena. She's 5 and you let her run wild like some kind of animal. Someone needs to teach her some discipline since you clearly won't." And then she did it. Before I could step between them, before Trevor could move from across the room, before anyone could process what was happening, Vanessa's hand flew through the air and connected with my daughter's cheek with a sound that seemed to echo off every wall in the house. The silence that followed was absolute. Christmas morning stopped. The whole world stopped. My little girl stood there, her hand pressed to her reddening cheek, too shocked to even cry yet, looking at her aunt like she couldn't understand how Christmas morning had suddenly become a nightmare. That's when my husband moved. Trevor Hartwell had been an FBI agent for 12 years. He'd handled domestic terrorism cases, white-collar crime, organized crime families that would make your blood run cold. But in that moment, watching my sister strike our daughter, he wasn't Agent Hartwell investigating a case. He was a father who had just witnessed an adult assault his child in his own home. His voice, when it came, was deadly calm. The voice he used when reading suspects their rights, when making arrests, when dealing with people who had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. "Vanessa," he said, his hand moving to his jacket where his badge was always kept, even on Christmas morning. "You just committed assault on a minor in front of a federal agent. You have the right to remain silent." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My name is Elena Hartwell, and I need you to understand something before we go any further into this story. I'm not the kind of person who calls the police on family. I'm not someone who creates drama or looks for reasons to tear apart relationships that took decades to build. I'm the sister who showed up to every birthday party, every graduation, every family crisis with a casserole and a shoulder to cry on. I'm the one who spent 32 years making excuses for Vanessa's behavior, smoothing over her sharp edges so family gatherings wouldn't end in tears. But here's what I want you to ask yourself as you listen to what happened that Christmas morning. What would you do if someone, anyone, even your own blood, put their hands on your child in anger? What would you do if they crossed a line so fundamental, so sacred, that everything you thought you knew about family loyalty suddenly meant nothing compared to protecting the little person who calls you mama? Because that's exactly where I found myself on December 25, 2023, standing in my living room, decorated with holly and mistletoe, watching my FBI agent husband inform my sister that hitting a 5-year-old constitutes a federal crime when witnessed by a law enforcement officer. And if you think calling the law on family makes me cold, heartless, or vindictive, then you've never been a mother watching someone hurt your baby while wearing a smile and calling it discipline. Stay with me, because this story isn't just about one slap or one Christmas morning gone wrong. This is about what happens when you finally stop protecting people who never protected you. This is about learning that sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you're meant to keep. And this is about discovering that the law doesn't care about your last name when it comes to protecting children. Something my sister was about to learn the hard way. You see, I grew up believing that family meant everything. That blood was thicker than water. That you never aired your dirty laundry in public. That what happened behind closed doors stayed behind closed doors no matter how wrong it felt. My parents, God rest their souls, raised us with old-school values where family loyalty trumped everything else. Your feelings, your boundaries, sometimes even your safety. They taught us that Vanessa's temper was just part of who she was, that I needed to be understanding because she'd always been high-strung, that keeping the peace was more important than keeping score of all the times she'd crossed lines that shouldn't be crossed. For 3 decades, I played that role perfectly. I was the buffer between Vanessa and the rest of the world, the translator who could explain away her cruelty as just being direct, the peacekeeper who absorbed her anger so everyone else could enjoy family functions. When she screamed at our teenage cousin for spilling soda on her white couch, I smoothed it over. When she made our elderly aunt cry by criticizing her cooking at Thanksgiving, I made excuses about work stress. When she threw a tantrum at my wedding because she didn't like her bridesmaid dress, I spent my honeymoon apologizing to relatives instead of enjoying my new marriage. But being a mother changes you in ways you can't understand until it happens to you. The moment they place that tiny, perfect human in your arms, something shifts in your DNA. Your priorities rearrange themselves with crystal clarity. Your tolerance for bullshit evaporates. Your mama bear instincts wake up and they don't go back to sleep. Ever. When Lily was born 5 years ago, with those big brown eyes and that smile that could light up a room, I made myself a promise. I promised that little girl would grow up knowing she was safe, knowing she was valued, knowing that the adults in her life would protect her, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it was complicated. Even when it meant making hard choices that other people wouldn't understand. I never imagined I'd have to protect her from my own sister. Trevor understood this from day one. From the moment he held Lily in the hospital, tears streaming down his face as he whispered promises to this tiny person who had just made him a father, he got it. He understood that being a parent meant being a guardian, a protector, a shield between your child and anything in this world that could harm them. His job with the FBI had shown him too many cases where adults failed to protect children, where family loyalty was used as an excuse to look the other way, where good people stayed silent while bad things happened to innocent kids. Elena, he told me once, back when Lily was just learning to walk and we were having those late-night conversations that new parents have about the kind of people we wanted to be, I've seen what happens when families protect the wrong people for the wrong reasons. I've arrested grandparents who knew their son was hurting kids but kept quiet to avoid scandal. I've interviewed mothers who chose their boyfriend over their daughter's safety. Promise me we'll never be those people. Promise me that our child will always know that we choose her first, no matter what. I promised. And on Christmas morning, with my sister's handprint still red on my daughter's cheek and my husband's federal badge gleaming in the morning light, I kept that promise. 2. Christmas morning 2023 was supposed to be perfect. I had been planning it for weeks, maybe even months, if I'm being honest. It was going to be our first Christmas, hosting both sides of the family in our new house on Willowbrook Lane, the colonial with the wraparound porch that Trevor and I had saved for 3 years to buy. I wanted everything to be magazine perfect, the kind of Christmas morning that Lily would remember when she was grown, the kind that would become family legend. I started decorating the week after Thanksgiving. Every room had its own theme. Winter wonderland in the living room with white lights and silver ornaments, rustic charm in the kitchen with pine garlands and red ribbons, cozy cabin vibes in the family room with plaid throws and wooden accents. I spent hours arranging the mantel, days perfecting the menu, weeks coordinating schedules so everyone could be there. Trevor's parents were flying in from Phoenix, his sister driving down from Boston with her twins. My cousin Rachel was bringing her new boyfriend, my aunt bringing her famous apple pie that took 2 days to make properly. And then there was Vanessa. My sister had been difficult about the whole arrangement from the beginning. When I first invited her back in October, she spent 20 minutes explaining why Christmas at my house wasn't convenient for her. The guest room wasn't big enough for her standards. The neighborhood was too far from her downtown apartment. She didn't want to drive in holiday traffic. She had other obligations, other invitations from more important people. But eventually, after what felt like negotiations with a foreign diplomat, she agreed to come for Christmas morning only, leaving before dinner because she had prior commitments she couldn't break. I should have known then that she was already setting up the day to be about her needs, her schedule, her comfort level, but I was so focused on creating the perfect family Christmas that I ignored all the warning signs that had been flashing red since we were children. The morning started beautifully. Trevor was up before dawn, setting up the new coffee maker his parents had sent early, the kind that grinds the beans and brews everything automatically so the whole house smells like Christmas morning should. Lily woke up at 6 a.m., practically vibrating with excitement, whispering loudly about whether Santa had really come, whether he'd eaten the cookies we left out, whether he'd remembered to bring carrots for the reindeer. We had that magical hour that every parent dreams of, just the three of us in our pajamas, watching our little girl discover that Christmas morning is real, that magic exists, that sometimes wishes really do come true. Trevor's family arrived at 8, filling the house with laughter and chaos in the best possible way. His parents, Robert and Diana, are the kind of people who make everyone feel welcome. Diana immediately started helping in the kitchen without being asked. Robert got down on the floor to play with Lily and her new toys. Trevor's sister Amanda brought her 4-year-old twins, Michael and Sarah, and suddenly our living room was full of children's voices and wrapping paper, and that beautiful noise that happens when kids are truly, purely happy. My Aunt Patricia showed up at 9 with her legendary apple pie and a car full of presents she'd been collecting all year. Cousin Rachel arrived with her new boyfriend Jake, who turned out to be exactly the kind of guy our family needed. Someone who could make coffee, tell stories, and wasn't afraid to get on the floor and play superheroes with the kids. By 10 o'clock, our house felt exactly like Christmas should feel: warm, full, alive with the kind of joy that makes all the planning and stress worth it. Everyone was asking about Vanessa, of course. Where's your sister? Is Vanessa coming? We haven't seen her since Easter. I kept checking my phone, watching the clock, making excuses. She was running late, she'd be here soon, she was just stopping by another gathering first. I was already starting to feel that familiar knot in my stomach that always appeared when I had to manage other people's expectations around my sister's behavior. At 10:30, she finally called, not to say she was on her way, not to apologize for being late, but to complain that there were too many cars in our driveway and she couldn't park close enough to the front door. Could someone move their car? Could Trevor come outside and help her carry her gifts? Did we expect her to walk all the way from the street in her heels? Trevor looked at me with that expression I knew well, the one that said he was choosing his battles, that he would handle this because he could see I was already stressed. He put on his coat and boots and trudged through the December snow to help my sister, who had brought exactly 3 small gift bags and somehow needed assistance getting them from her car to our front porch. When she finally walked through our front door at 10:45, the energy in the room shifted immediately. It wasn't anything she said or did at first. It was just her presence, the way she surveyed everything with that critical eye, the way conversations got a little quieter, the way people seemed to unconsciously brace themselves for something they couldn't quite name. She was dressed like she was going to a business meeting, not a family Christmas. Sharp black dress, designer heels, jewelry that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She looked around our living room, decorated with weeks of love and care, and her first words were, "Oh, Elena, this is quite festive, isn't it?" Festive, said in the tone other people might use to say tragic or overwhelming. Already, she was making it clear that our Christmas wasn't sophisticated enough, wasn't elegant enough, wasn't up to her standards. But I was determined not to let her mood affect everyone else's joy. I introduced her to Jake, reintroduced her to Trevor's parents, who she'd met only once before, tried to pull her into the warm circle of family that had been building all morning. The kids were excited to see their aunt, especially Lily, who ran up with a drawing she'd made especially for Vanessa, a crayon masterpiece of our family standing under a Christmas tree, everyone holding hands and smiling. Vanessa looked at the drawing for exactly 3 seconds before setting it aside without comment. "Where should I put my coat?" she asked, as if a 5-year-old's artwork was invisible to her. That should have been my first real warning. Not the complaints about parking or the backhanded comment about decorations, but the way she dismissed Lily's gift without even pretending to care. Any normal adult, even one having a bad day, would have gushed over a child's drawing, would have made a big show of how beautiful it was, would have understood that to a 5-year-old, that piece of construction paper represented hours of careful work and love. But this was Vanessa, and this was exactly the kind of behavior I'd been excusing my entire life. She wasn't good with kids, I told myself. She was tired from the drive. She'd warm up once she settled in. I made the same excuses I'd been making for 30 years. The same rationalizations that had allowed her to treat people poorly without consequences, because her little sister would always be there to smooth things over. I should have seen what was coming. The signs were all there in those first 15 minutes. The criticism disguised as observation, the dismissal of Lily's excitement, the way she positioned herself apart from the family rather than part of it. But I was so invested in making Christmas morning perfect, so determined to prove that our family could be happy and functional and whole, that I ignored every instinct telling me this wasn't going to end well. Instead, I smiled and offered her coffee, asked if she was hungry, tried to pull her into conversations with relatives who were genuinely happy to see her. I played my familiar role as the bridge between Vanessa and the rest of the world, the translator who could make her seem warmer than she was, the buffer who absorbed her sharp edges so everyone else could stay comfortable. But you can't buffer a slap. You can't translate away the sound of an adult's hand connecting with a child's face. And you can't smooth over the moment when someone crosses a line so fundamental that all the family loyalty in the world can't excuse it away. The first real crack in Christmas morning came during present opening. We had established a system years ago when the kids were smaller. Everyone takes turns, youngest to oldest, so every gift gets proper attention and no one feels rushed or overlooked. It's one of those family traditions that seems silly until you realize how much it means to the children, how it teaches them patience and generosity and the joy of watching other people's happiness. Lily had just finished opening her art set, that beautiful, elaborate case I mentioned, when Vanessa's voice cut through the morning like glass breaking. "This is taking forever," she announced to no one in particular, checking her phone for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. "Can't we just let everyone open everything at once? Some of us have other places to be." The room went quiet for a moment, not the comfortable quiet of people focused on a child's joy, but the awkward silence that happens when someone says something that makes everyone else uncomfortable. Trevor's mother, Deanna, looked confused. She'd been filming Lily's reaction to her grandmother's gift, one of those precious moments you want to capture forever. His father, Robert, who had been helping 4-year-old Michael with the tape on a particularly stubborn package, looked up with raised eyebrows. "We're not in any rush, are we?" Amanda said diplomatically, speaking for the room. "This is the fun part, watching their faces." But Vanessa was already irritated, already past the point where diplomacy could reach her. "It's just inefficient," she said, that word dripping with the kind of condescension that made my stomach clench. "All this ceremony over toys. They're going to lose interest in half of this stuff by February anyway." I felt Trevor's hand find mine, a gentle squeeze that meant he could see my stress level rising. He knew that tone in my sister's voice, knew what it meant when she started criticizing family traditions that had nothing to do with her. We'd talked about it before, how Vanessa seemed incapable of letting other people enjoy things without commentary, without judgment, without making sure everyone knew she was above such simple pleasures. "The kids love it this way," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice light. "It makes Christmas morning last longer." "Some of us don't want it to last longer," she replied, not even looking at me. She was scrolling through her phone now, making it clear that whatever was on that screen was more important than her 5-year-old niece opening presents on Christmas morning. That's when Lily, sweet Lily, who was still young enough to believe that everyone loved Christmas as much as she did, tried to include her aunt in the magic. She walked over to Vanessa with that gorgeous smile, holding a candy cane ornament she'd just unwrapped. "Aunt Vanessa, look! It smells like real peppermint. Want to smell it?" My sister looked down at my daughter, really looked at her for the first time that morning, and I saw something in her expression that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just annoyance or impatience. It was disgust. Like Lily was bothering her, interrupting something important, being an inconvenience simply by existing as a happy 5-year-old on Christmas morning. "I'm busy, Lily," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut. "Go play with your toys." The light in my daughter's eyes dimmed just a little. Not completely. She was still too young to understand that kind of cruelty, still too innocent to recognize rejection when it was dressed up as adult business. But something in her face changed, some small piece of Christmas morning joy flickering out. Trevor saw it too. I watched his jaw tighten, watched him take a slow breath the way he did when he was choosing not to say something that needed to be said. He'd been patient with my sister for 5 years, tolerating her coldness toward Lily, making excuses when she forgot birthdays or made cutting comments about children being too much work. But this was different. This was Christmas morning in our home, with our daughter trying to share something beautiful with her aunt. "Maybe we should move on to the next present," I said quickly, trying to redirect the energy, trying to salvage what was left of the morning's magic. But Vanessa wasn't done. "Actually, Elena, we need to talk about boundaries," she said, finally putting her phone down and giving me her full attention in that way that always meant trouble. "Lily needs to learn that adults aren't always available for her entertainment. This constant need for attention, this assumption that everyone wants to engage with her every little discovery, it's not healthy." The room had gone completely silent now. Even the children seemed to sense that something was wrong, that the mood had shifted into dangerous territory. Cousin Rachel was staring at her coffee cup. Trevor's parents were looking at each other with expressions I couldn't read. My Aunt Patricia had gone very still in her chair. "She's 5, Vanessa," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "She's excited about Christmas. She wanted to share something with you." "And that's exactly the problem," my sister continued, warming up to her theme now, settling into the familiar role of family critic that she wore so comfortably. "You let her believe that her excitement is always welcome, that everyone wants to participate in her little performances. That's not how the real world works, Elena. People have their own lives, their own priorities. Teaching her to respect adult boundaries isn't cruel. It's preparation for reality." Performance. She called my daughter's joy a performance. I felt something shift inside me then, something I'd never felt before in 32 years of being Vanessa's sister. It wasn't anger exactly, though anger was part of it. It was deeper than that, more primitive. It was the feeling a mother wolf gets when something threatens her cub. It was every protective instinct I'd developed since the moment Lily was born, suddenly focused on the woman sitting in my living room calling my baby's happiness a show. "Her excitement is welcome," I said, and my voice was steadier now, stronger. "In this house, children's joy is always welcome. That's what family means." Vanessa's laugh was like ice cracking. "Family means teaching children appropriate behavior, Elena. It means preparing them for a world that won't coddle them the way you do. Look around. Everyone here is too polite to say it, but we're all thinking the same thing. Lily is spoiled. She expects constant attention, constant praise, constant engagement. That's not normal child behavior. That's what happens when parents don't set proper boundaries." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the clock ticking on the mantel, could hear someone breathing too carefully, could hear the sound of my own heartbeat getting louder in my ears. Because Vanessa had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She hadn't just criticized my parenting, she'd done it in front of my daughter, in front of our entire family on Christmas morning. But she wasn't finished. I'm saying this because I love you both, she continued, her voice taking on that false sweetness that always preceded her cruelest observations. But someone needs to tell you the truth. Lily's behavior is exhausting. The constant chatter, the need for approval, the way she interrupts adult conversations because she thinks everything she has to say is fascinating. It's not cute anymore, Elena. It's bratty. And if you don't address it now, she's going to grow up thinking the world revolves around her. That's when I realized the entire room was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Trevor's parents, who had never heard anyone speak about their granddaughter this way, his sister, whose own children were suddenly very quiet on the floor, my cousin, my aunt, everyone who had spent the morning watching Lily be exactly what a 5-year-old should be on Christmas. Joyful, excited, generous with her love. And that's when I understood that this wasn't really about Lily at all. This was about Vanessa's need to control every room she entered, to make sure everyone knew she was the authority on everything from parenting to proper behavior to what constituted appropriate Christmas morning enthusiasm. She was criticizing my daughter for being happy. She was calling love and joy and excitement inappropriate. She was sitting in my living room, surrounded by people who adored Lily, telling me that my child's natural personality was a problem that needed to be fixed. But what I didn't know yet, what none of us could have predicted, was that her next move would be physical. That all of this criticism, all of this building tension, all of this cruelty disguised as concern, was leading to a moment that would change everything forever. I should have said something then. I should have told Vanessa to stop, should have defended my daughter, should have ended this conversation before it went any further. But 32 years of conditioning doesn't disappear in a moment of anger. 32 years of being told that keeping the peace was my job, that Vanessa's feelings mattered more than anyone else's comfort, that family harmony was worth any price. All of that was still running through my veins like poison, still whispering that I could fix this if I just tried harder. So instead of protecting my daughter, I tried to protect my sister from herself. "Vanessa, please," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's Christmas morning, can we just what, Elena?" she interrupted, her voice getting louder, more aggressive. "Pretend that spoiling a child is good parenting? Pretend that letting her interrupt adults and demand constant attention is somehow healthy? I'm the only one here brave enough to tell you the truth, and you want me to be quiet because it's Christmas?" I looked around the room at the faces of people I loved. Trevor's parents, who had driven across the country to be here, my aunt, who had been looking forward to this morning for months, the children who were now huddled together on the floor, confused and scared by the tension they could feel but didn't understand. This was supposed to be their Christmas morning. This was supposed to be about joy and love and family bonds that would last a lifetime. But all I could think about was damage control. How to make Vanessa calm down. How to redirect her anger. How to get through the next few hours without completely destroying Christmas for everyone else. It's shameful to admit now, but in that moment I was more worried about my sister's emotional state than my daughter's psychological well-being. "You're right," I heard myself saying, the words tasting like acid in my mouth. "Maybe we have been letting her get a little too excited. Kids can get overwhelmed on Christmas and—" "Elena," Trevor's voice cut through my rambling apology like a blade. "Just my name," said in a tone I'd never heard before. When I looked at him, his face was completely still, but his eyes were blazing. "Don't." That single word stopped me cold. Because Trevor wasn't just my husband in that moment. He was an FBI agent who had spent 12 years studying human behavior, reading situations, understanding the psychology of abuse and manipulation. And he was telling me, with that one quiet word, that what was happening in our living room wasn't normal family conflict. It was something else entirely. But I was so deep in my pattern of managing Vanessa's emotions that I couldn't hear what he was really saying. I couldn't see what everyone else in that room was seeing, that my sister was systematically tearing down a 5-year-old child on Christmas morning, and I was helping her do it by trying to find middle ground where none existed. Trevor, it's fine, I said, still trying to smooth things over. We're just having a conversation about how your daughter is a brat who needs to be taught her place. Vanessa finished for me, her voice dripping with satisfaction at having finally gotten me to agree with her. About how Elena's parenting style is creating a monster who thinks the world revolves around her little whims and desires. Monster. She called my 5-year-old daughter a monster. And that's when something inside me finally broke. Not the loud, explosive kind of breaking that shatters everything around it, the quiet kind. The kind that happens deep in your chest, in the place where you keep your most fundamental truths about who you are and what you stand for. It was the sound of 32 years of people-pleasing finally cracking under the weight of something too heavy to carry anymore. I looked at Lily, sitting on the floor next to her cousins, her little face confused and sad, still holding that art set she'd been so excited about just minutes before. She was trying to be invisible now, trying not to draw any more of her aunt's anger, trying to disappear into the carpet because somehow, in her 5-year-old mind, she thought this was her fault. And I realized that my daughter was learning something on this Christmas morning that I never wanted her to learn. She was learning that her joy was too much for some people. She was learning that her excitement was annoying, that her love was inconvenient, that her very existence could be called bratty and monstrous by someone who was supposed to care about her. She was learning that adults could say cruel things about children right in front of them, and other adults would just let it happen. She was learning what I had learned as a child when Vanessa criticized everything I did, everything I said, everything I was, that some people in your family don't actually like you very much, and everyone else will expect you to accept that as normal. But here's the thing about being a parent that I hadn't understood before I became one. Watching your child learn the lessons that broke you is unbearable. Seeing them shrink themselves to avoid someone else's cruelty is physically painful. Realizing that your own childhood wounds are about to become theirs unless you do something different, that changes everything. I stood up from the couch, my legs shaky but my voice steadier than it had been all morning. "Vanessa," I said, and something in my tone made her stop mid-sentence in whatever criticism she was building up to next. "I need you to stop talking about my daughter that way." The room went completely silent. Not just quiet, silent, like everyone had stopped breathing at the same time. My sister's eyes narrowed. This wasn't the Elena she knew, the one who absorbed her anger and made excuses and found ways to agree with her even when she was being unreasonable. This was someone new, someone she hadn't met before. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice dangerously low. I said stop. And my voice was getting stronger now. Clearer. "Stop criticizing her. Stop calling her names. Stop telling me that my child's happiness is a problem that needs to be fixed. She's 5 years old, Vanessa. She's excited about Christmas morning in her own home with her family. That's not bratty. That's normal. That's healthy. That's exactly what she should be feeling right now." Vanessa's face was changing, shifting from surprise to anger to something uglier. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by me, especially not in front of an audience. For 32 years, I had been her enabler, her excuse maker, her buffer between her cruelty and the world's reaction to it. And now I was standing in my own living room, in front of my entire family, telling her that she was wrong. "You're being ridiculous, Elena," she said, her voice tight with controlled rage. "I'm trying to help you understand that." "No," I interrupted, and the word came out stronger than I expected, louder than I intended. "You're not trying to help. You're trying to control. You're trying to make a 5-year-old child ashamed of being happy because her joy makes you uncomfortable. And I won't let you do that anymore." The transformation in my sister's face was immediate and terrifying. The mask of concern, of loving aunt just trying to help, fell away completely. What was underneath was pure fury. The rage of someone who had just been denied something they felt entitled to. The anger of a person who couldn't tolerate being told no. "You have no idea what you're talking about," she hissed, standing up so fast that her chair rocked backward. "You live in this little bubble where everyone tells you what a wonderful mother you are, where everyone pretends that child isn't completely out of control, where no one has the guts to tell you the truth about what you're raising." She was moving now, pacing in front of the Christmas tree like a caged animal, her voice getting louder, more vicious. "But I'll tell you the truth, Elena. Your daughter is going to grow up thinking she can interrupt anyone, demand attention from everyone, expect the world to stop and admire every little thing she does. She's going to be one of those entitled, spoiled brats that everyone hates but no one corrects, because mommy and daddy think she's too precious to hear the word no." Trevor was standing now too, I realized. Not saying anything, not making any sudden moves, but positioning himself between Lily and her aunt in a way that looked casual but felt purposeful. His FBI training was kicking in, I could tell. He was reading the situation, assessing threat levels, preparing for possibilities the rest of us couldn't even imagine. But I was still focused on my sister, still trapped in this moment of finally standing up to her after decades of backing down. "Vanessa, you need to leave," I said, my voice calmer now but absolutely certain. "I want you to leave my house right now." The silence that followed was absolute. Christmas morning, with all its joy and tradition and family warmth, had just died in my living room. But something else had been born in its place, something I'd never felt before in my relationship with my sister. Clarity, strength. The absolute certainty that I was done protecting her from the consequences of her own cruelty. "You're kicking me out?" she asked, her voice incredulous. "On Christmas morning? Because I tried to give you some honest feedback about your parenting?" "I'm asking you to leave because you called my 5-year-old daughter a monster," I said, and my voice didn't shake at all. "Because you spent the last 20 minutes trying to convince me that her happiness is a character flaw. Because you're making Christmas morning about your need to criticize and control instead of about family and love and celebrating the children we're supposed to protect." And that's when I saw it in her eyes, the moment she decided that words weren't enough anymore, that if she couldn't control this situation with her voice, she would control it another way. The moment she looked at Lily, still sitting quietly on the floor, and decided that the child needed to be taught a lesson that her mother was too weak to deliver. I should have moved faster. I should have stepped between them. I should have seen what was coming and prevented it. But 32 years of conditioning had trained me to watch, to wait, to hope that things would work themselves out without me having to take action. And in that moment of hesitation, in those few seconds where I was still trying to de-escalate instead of protect, Vanessa made the choice that would change everything forever. What happened next lasted maybe 3 seconds, but those 3 seconds contained lifetimes of consequences that none of us could have anticipated. What I thought was a family argument about boundaries and Christmas morning behavior was actually something else entirely. Something that had been building for years, something that would reveal truths about my sister that I had been willfully blind to for most of my adult life. The slap itself was exactly what I described in the beginning, sharp, deliberate, delivered with enough force to leave a red handprint on my 5-year-old daughter's cheek. But what I didn't tell you then, what I couldn't process in that moment of shock and horror, was what Trevor saw that the rest of us missed. See, when you're married to an FBI agent for 8 years, you learn things about human behavior that most people never have to consider. You learn about escalation patterns, about the difference between momentary loss of control and calculated violence, about the subtle signs that separate people who make mistakes from people who make choices. Trevor had been watching my sister with professional eyes from the moment she dismissed Lily's drawing, cataloging behaviors that seemed like normal family dysfunction to the rest of us, but registered as something much more serious to someone trained to recognize predatory patterns. The way she had positioned herself physically during her verbal assault, moving closer to Lily with each criticism, using her height and adult authority to intimidate a child. The way she had isolated her target, focusing all of her anger on the smallest, most vulnerable person in the room while ignoring the adults who might fight back. The way she had tested boundaries systematically, starting with small cruelties and building to larger ones, watching to see how much the family would tolerate before someone intervened. But most importantly, Trevor had noticed something about that slap that the rest of us were too shocked to catch in real time. It wasn't impulsive. It was practiced. "Elena," he said quietly, his voice deadly calm as he knelt beside Lily, who was finally starting to cry, "how many times has your sister been alone with children?" The question hit me like ice water. Not, "How could she do this?" or "Are you okay?" but a specific investigative question that made my blood run cold because I knew exactly why he was asking it. "What do you mean?" I whispered, even though I already knew what he meant, even though my mind was already racing through years of family gatherings, babysitting arrangements, times when Vanessa had volunteered to help with the kids while the adults handled other things. Trevor was examining Lily's cheek with the gentle efficiency of someone who had documented injuries before, his FBI training taking over even as his father's heart was breaking. "That wasn't anger, Elena. Anger is sloppy, unpredictable. That was precise, controlled, like she's done it before." The room had gone silent in a different way now. Not the uncomfortable quiet of family tension, but the breathless silence of people realizing they had just witnessed something criminal. Trevor's parents were staring at Vanessa with expressions I'd never seen before, like they were looking at a stranger who had somehow materialized in their grandchild's living room. My Aunt Patricia had gone completely pale, one hand pressed to her chest like her heart was struggling to keep pace with what she'd just seen. But it was my cousin Rachel who broke the silence with words that changed everything. "Oh my God, Elena. Remember when she babysat Tyler and Madison?" Tyler and Madison were Rachel's older kids, now teenagers, but they'd been small once. They'd spent weekends at Vanessa's apartment when Rachel was going through her divorce 6 years ago, when she needed help and family support, and someone she could trust with her children, while she worked double shifts to keep her house. "What about Tyler and Madison?" I asked, but my voice sounded strange even to me, like it was coming from somewhere far away. Rachel was looking at Vanessa with dawning horror, like puzzle pieces were falling into place in her mind, forming a picture she'd never wanted to see. "Tyler came home from her place once with a bruise on his arm, a perfect handprint bruise. I asked him about it, and he said he'd fallen, but the way he said it, like he'd been coached, like someone had told him exactly what to say." The silence that followed was deafening, because suddenly we were all thinking about times when children in our family had been quiet after spending time with Vanessa, times when they'd seemed subdued or afraid or reluctant to talk about what they'd done with their aunt, moments we'd dismissed as tiredness or shyness or normal childhood moods. "And Madison," Rachel continued, her voice getting stronger as memories surfaced. "She used to love staying overnight places. She was adventurous, fearless. But after that summer, when she spent a week with Vanessa, she stopped wanting sleepovers anywhere. She'd cry when I tried to leave her with babysitters. I thought she was just going through a phase, but now..." Trevor was already moving, already reaching for his phone, his federal training taking over completely. "Elena, I need you to think carefully. Has Lily ever been alone with your sister? Any time at all?" My mind was racing, trying to remember, trying to catalog every family gathering, every holiday, every time Vanessa might have had access to children without adult supervision. And then I remembered something that made my knees go weak. "Last Easter," I whispered, "Lily spilled juice on her dress during dinner, and Vanessa offered to take her upstairs to help her change. They were gone for maybe 15 minutes. 15 minutes. 15 minutes, when my daughter had been alone with a woman who had just demonstrated, in front of 8 witnesses, that she was willing to strike a child with enough force to leave marks. "How was Lily when they came back down?" Trevor asked, and his voice was gentle but urgent. The voice he used when interviewing victims, when trying to coax traumatic memories from people who might not even realize they'd been traumatized. I closed my eyes, trying to remember Easter morning, trying to see past the chaos of family dinner and egg hunts, and the general exhaustion of hosting holidays. "She was quiet," I said slowly. "She didn't want to sit near Vanessa during dessert. She kept staying close to me for the rest of the day. I thought she was just tired, but she hadn't been tired. She'd been scared. My 5-year-old daughter had been alone with someone who hurt her. And then she'd come downstairs and tried to act normal because children do that. Because they protect adults from the truth, when the truth is too big and scary for their little minds to process." Trevor was already dialing a number, already switching into federal agent mode. "I'm calling Child Protective Services," he said, not asking permission, not negotiating, just stating what was going to happen next. "And I'm calling my supervisor. This isn't just domestic violence anymore. This is potentially a pattern of child abuse across state lines, which makes it a federal case." That's when Vanessa finally spoke, her voice shrill with panic. "You can't be serious! It was one slap! Elena, tell him he's overreacting! Tell him this is just family business!" But I wasn't listening to her anymore. I was thinking about every time Lily had been quiet after family gatherings, every time she'd seemed withdrawn or clingy or afraid. I was thinking about Tyler's handprint bruise, and Madison's sudden fear of sleepovers, and all the children in our extended family who might have suffered in silence because the adults around them were too committed to keeping the peace to notice the signs. "How many kids, Vanessa?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How many children have you hurt?" Her face went through a series of transformations: surprise, anger, calculation, and finally something that looked almost like relief. Like she was tired of pretending, tired of hiding, tired of being careful about when and where and how she expressed the cruelty that had always been at her core. "They needed discipline," she said finally, her voice cold and matter-of-fact. "Parents these days are too soft, too permissive. Someone has to teach them that actions have consequences, that the world doesn't revolve around their little wants and needs. Actions have consequences." She was about to learn exactly how true that statement was. Because what Vanessa didn't understand, what she couldn't have anticipated when she decided to strike my daughter in front of a room full of witnesses, was that one of those witnesses was a federal law enforcement officer who had spent years building cases against people who hurt children. Who knew exactly what questions to ask, what evidence to collect, what agencies to call when someone crossed the line from family dysfunction into criminal behavior. She thought she was disciplining a spoiled child in front of her weak-willed sister, who would make excuses and smooth things over like always. Instead, she had just confessed to a pattern of child abuse in front of an FBI agent who had already started building a case against her. The sound of Trevor's voice in the background, calm and professional as he spoke to his supervisor, was the sound of Vanessa's world beginning to collapse. And for the first time in 32 years of being her sister, I wasn't going to try to catch her when she fell. The next 48 hours unfolded like a controlled demolition, each revelation bringing down another piece of the life Vanessa had carefully constructed while hiding her true nature from the world. What started as a Christmas morning family argument had become a federal investigation, and Trevor's phone calls that morning had set in motion a machine that, once started, couldn't be stopped. By December 27th, Child Protective Services had opened formal investigations in 3 states. Not just for what happened to Lily, but for every child Vanessa had ever had unsupervised access to over the past 15 years. The FBI's database cross-referenced her employment history, her residential addresses, her known associates, building a timeline that painted a picture none of us wanted to see, but could no longer ignore. She had been a substitute teacher in Oregon from 2019 to 2021. The records showed 17 separate incidents of students being sent to the nurse with unexplained bruises, scratches, or complaints of being grabbed too hard during classroom management. 17 children who had tried to tell adults that their substitute teacher was hurting them, only to be dismissed because Vanessa was family adjacent to the school board president. My cousin on my mother's side, who had vouched for her character when she applied for the position, she had volunteered at a church nursery in Colorado during 2018, where 3 different toddlers had suddenly developed severe separation anxiety and refused to be left in childcare. The church leadership had quietly asked her to step down after multiple complaints from parents, but they hadn't reported anything to authorities because there was no concrete evidence, and they, quote, didn't want to cause unnecessary drama in the congregation. She had worked as a nanny for 2 different families in Arizona between 2016 and 2017. Both families had terminated her employment abruptly, and when FBI agents interviewed them, they discovered a pattern that made my stomach turn. Children who had been happy and outgoing before Vanessa's employment had become withdrawn, anxious, afraid to make noise or mess during play. One mother, Sarah Blackstone, broke down crying during her interview, telling agents that her 4-year-old son had started having nightmares about, quote, the mean lady who says children should be quiet, but she'd thought he was just adjusting to having a new caregiver. The timeline painted a horrifying picture of my sister moving from state to state, job to job, family to family, leaving a trail of traumatized children in her wake. Each time someone got too suspicious, each time parents started asking too many questions, she would simply relocate and start fresh somewhere else. She had been using our family connections, our shared name, our reputation for respectability as a shield to gain access to vulnerable children for over a decade. But it was the discovery of her journals that finally revealed the full scope of what we'd all missed. On December 28th, armed with a federal search warrant, agents searched Vanessa's downtown apartment. Hidden in a locked filing cabinet behind her bedroom closet, they found 3 leather-bound journals, spanning 8 years, filled with detailed entries about her interactions with children. Not random observations or innocent notes, clinical, methodical documentation of her discipline techniques and their effectiveness on different personality types. Trevor showed me selected excerpts 2 weeks later, after I'd given my formal statement and been cleared to receive information relevant to my daughter's case. I wish he hadn't. I wish I could unknow what those pages revealed about the woman I'd shared a childhood with, the woman I'd defended and enabled and protected for 32 years. Child exhibits defiant behavior when asked to clean up toys, read one entry from September 2020. Applied pressure point technique to shoulder area until compliance achieved. Child now responds to verbal commands without physical intervention required. Parents believe improvement is natural maturation. Pressure point technique. She had written about hurting children like she was conducting scientific experiments, like their pain was data to be collected and analyzed for future reference. Another entry from March 2019, Lily H. displays excessive emotional expression during family gatherings. Implemented isolation protocol during Easter visit, removed child from group setting, explained consequences of attention-seeking behavior through controlled physical correction. Child showed immediate behavioral modification. Mother Elena remains unaware of intervention. Controlled physical correction. Isolation protocol. She had hurt my daughter and written about it like she was filing a progress report, like Lily was a problem to be solved, rather than a little girl to be loved and protected. The worst part was reading her analysis of the adults in her life, how easily we could be manipulated, how predictably we would respond to her carefully crafted explanations and excuses. She had mapped out our family dynamics like a military strategist, identifying who would be most likely to believe her, who would make excuses for her behavior, who could be counted on to prioritize family harmony over child safety. About me, she had written, Elena's pathological need for family unity makes her ideal cover. She will rationalize any behavior to maintain relationships. Her guilt over childhood perceived favoritism creates exploitable vulnerability. She can be counted on to suppress her maternal instincts in service of keeping peace. Pathological need for family unity. She had identified my greatest weakness and used it as a weapon against my own child. About Trevor, from an entry dated just 6 months earlier, brother-in-law's federal training makes him higher risk for detection. However, his respect for Elena's family relationships and desire to avoid marital conflict creates manageable oversight gap. Recommend limiting exposure to supervised group settings only. She had been afraid of Trevor's professional training, had been carefully managing her behavior around him, while continuing to abuse children whenever she could arrange unsupervised access. She had been playing a long game, building trust over years so that she could continue having opportunities to hurt kids without suspicion. The journals revealed 23 different children across 7 states. 23 families who had trusted her with their most precious possessions, who had welcomed her into their homes, who had believed that being related to me meant she shared my values about protecting and nurturing children. 23 children who had suffered in silence because the adults around them couldn't imagine that someone's sister, someone's aunt, someone's family member could be systematically cruel to children, while maintaining a facade of respectability. By January 3rd, the story had made national news. Not the family drama aspect, but the law enforcement angle, how one FBI agent's recognition of abuse patterns had uncovered a multi-state network of child victims. Trevor was being interviewed on legal podcasts about recognizing signs of systematic abuse in family settings. Child advocacy groups were using Vanessa's case as an example of how predators hide in plain sight, using family connections and social respectability to access victims. The phone call started on January 5th. Parents from Oregon, Colorado, Arizona, even states where Vanessa had only visited briefly, calling to tell me their stories. Stories about children who had mentioned a mean lady at family gatherings, who had shown behavioral changes after spending time with my sister, who had tried in their innocent, childish ways to tell adults that someone was hurting them but hadn't been believed because the someone was family. Mrs. Patterson from Denver called to tell me about her 6-year-old grandson, who had stopped wanting to visit his great-aunt after Vanessa stayed there for Christmas 2021. The child had told his mother that Aunt Vanessa's friend had taught him that little boys who made noise got hurt, but the family had assumed he was confused about names or making up stories for attention. A father from Phoenix called to say his daughter still had nightmares about the quiet game 2 years after Vanessa had babysat her during a family wedding. The quiet game, according to his now 8-year-old daughter, involved staying perfectly silent and still while the babysitter counted to 100, with painful consequences for any child who moved or made a sound before time was up. Each phone call was another child I hadn't protected, another family I hadn't warned, another consequence of my 32 years of making excuses for behavior that should have raised every red flag in existence. Each story was proof that my sister hadn't just slapped Lily on Christmas morning. She had been systematically abusing children for years, while I provided her with credibility, access, and cover. The woman I had defended, enabled, and protected for most of my adult life wasn't just cruel or difficult or high-strung. She was a predator who had used our family name, our family gatherings, and my family loyalty as hunting grounds for victims too small to fight back and too innocent to understand that what was happening to them wasn't normal, wasn't deserved, and wasn't their fault. And the most horrifying realization of all was that if she hadn't gotten so comfortable, so arrogant, so confident in her ability to manipulate our family dynamics, she might have continued for years more. If she had controlled herself for just a few more hours on Christmas morning, if she had waited until she was alone with Lily to hurt her, if she had been just a little more careful about maintaining her mask of respectability, she might still be out there now, still finding new children to hurt, still using our family connections to access victims. 23 children had suffered because I had chosen family loyalty over child safety. 23 families had been betrayed because I had valued keeping peace over keeping children safe. 23 kids had been hurt because I had spent 32 years enabling a monster who happened to share my DNA. But that was about to change. Because while Vanessa had been documenting her crimes in careful detail, she had also been creating the evidence that would ensure she never had access to another child again. The first time Vanessa called me from county jail, I was feeding Lily breakfast on a Tuesday morning in mid-January. The phone rang at 7:43 a.m., and when I saw Riverside County Correctional Facility on the caller ID, my hand started shaking so hard I nearly dropped the maple syrup bottle I was holding. I let it go to voicemail. 3 hours later, she called again. This time I was in my therapist's office, Dr. Patricia Mendez, a trauma specialist Trevor had found, who specialized in helping families recover from discovering abuse in their midst. Dr. Mendez looked at my phone, looked at my face, and said quietly, "You don't have to answer that call, Elena. You don't owe anyone access to you right now, especially not the person who caused this trauma." I let that one go to voicemail too. By the end of the week, there were 14 voicemails from Vanessa, each one more desperate than the last. But I wasn't ready to hear them yet, wasn't strong enough to listen to whatever manipulation or justification or plea for family loyalty she had prepared. I was still learning how to be a person who put my daughter's safety above my sister's feelings, still figuring out how to exist in the world without automatically making excuses for behavior that should have been inexcusable. The transformation didn't happen overnight. For 32 years, my nervous system had been wired to respond to Vanessa's distress as an emergency that required my immediate attention and intervention. When she was upset, I was upset. When she needed something, I provided it. When she was in trouble, I fixed it. Breaking that pattern felt like rewiring my entire personality, like learning to speak a new language after decades of fluency in the old one. Dr. Mendez helped me understand what she called trauma bonding with an abuser through family obligation. She explained that I had been conditioned from childhood to prioritize Vanessa's emotional needs over everyone else's physical and psychological safety, including my own daughter's. She helped me see that what I had called keeping the peace was actually enabling violence, and what I had called family loyalty was actually protecting a predator. "Elena," she said during our third session, "imagine Lily is 30 years old and she's telling you that someone has been hurting her children, your grandchildren. But she won't report it, won't cut contact, won't take any action to protect them because the abuser is her sister, and she doesn't want to upset family dynamics. How would that make you feel?" The answer hit me like a physical blow. I would be horrified. I would be furious. I would be heartbroken that my daughter valued abstract concepts like family harmony more than her children's actual safety. I would not understand how she could choose the comfort of an abuser over the protection of innocent kids. And that's exactly what I had been doing for years. When I finally listened to Vanessa's voicemails 3 weeks later, they were exactly what Dr. Mendez had predicted they would be, a textbook progression through the manipulation tactics that had worked on me for decades. The first few were indignant. "Elena, this is insane. You know I would never hurt a child. Trevor is blowing this completely out of proportion because he doesn't understand our family dynamics. You need to call me back and help me explain to these people that this is all a misunderstanding." Then came the guilt. "I can't believe you're letting them keep me here over one moment of losing my temper. I made a mistake, Elena. I was stressed about work, overwhelmed by all the noise and chaos, and I reacted poorly. But one slap doesn't make me a child abuser. You know me better than that." Then the bargaining. "I've been thinking about what happened, and you're right that I need to work on my patience with children. I'm willing to take anger management classes, parenting courses, whatever you think would help. but I need you to talk to Trevor about dropping these charges. I need you to help me fix this." And finally, the threats disguised as consequences. "Elena, if you don't help me get out of this situation, it's going to destroy our entire family. Mom and Dad's memory will be tainted by scandal. Rachel will never trust family gatherings again. The kids will grow up thinking their aunt is a monster. Is that really what you want? All because you can't forgive one moment of poor judgment?" Listening to those messages was like watching a masterclass in emotional manipulation. Every technique she'd used on me for 32 years was there. The gaslighting, the minimization, the false urgency, the weaponized family guilt. But for the first time in my life, I could hear them for what they were instead of feeling compelled to respond to them. Because the woman leaving those voicemails wasn't my sister asking for help. She was a predator who had hurt children, including my child, trying to manipulate her way back into a position where she could hurt more children. The family loyalty she was invoking was the same loyalty she had exploited to gain access to victims. The forgiveness she was demanding was the same forgiveness that had enabled years of abuse. I deleted all 14 messages without responding to a single one. The power shift that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced in our relationship. For the first time in my adult life, Vanessa needed something from me that I wasn't automatically providing. She needed my support, my advocacy, my willingness to minimize her actions and help her escape consequences. She needed me to be the same Elena who had spent decades smoothing over her cruelty and making excuses for her behavior. But that Elena was gone. In her place was a mother who had watched her 5-year-old daughter get slapped by someone who was supposed to love her, who had discovered that this same someone had been systematically abusing children for years while using our family as cover. In her place was a woman who had learned that protecting an abuser makes you complicit in their abuse, that family loyalty without boundaries is just another form of enabling, and that sometimes love means saying no even when it's hard. The first boundary I set was refusing to take her calls. The second was refusing to visit her in jail when she sent messages through her lawyer asking me to come. The third was hiring my own attorney, not to help her, but to protect Lily and myself from any attempt she might make to manipulate the legal process through family connections. But the hardest boundary was the one I set with other family members who couldn't understand why I wasn't helping her. My uncle called in February, Vanessa's former boss from her Oregon teaching job. "Elena, I know this situation is complicated, but Vanessa is family. She needs our support right now, not our judgment. Maybe she made some mistakes, but destroying her life isn't going to help anyone heal." "Uncle David," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "she didn't make mistakes. She systematically abused children for years. She documented it in journals. She planned it, executed it, and covered it up. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. And my choice is to protect children, including my own daughter, from someone who has proven she will hurt them, given the opportunity." The silence that followed was long and uncomfortable. Uncle David had expected the old Elena, the one who would find ways to agree with him, who would prioritize family relationships over uncomfortable truths. He wasn't prepared for a woman who would choose clarity over comfort, who would protect victims over protecting family reputation. "I think you're being too harsh," he said finally. "She's your sister." "And Lily is my daughter," I replied. Being Vanessa's sister doesn't make me responsible for protecting her from the consequences of her choices. But being Lily's mother does make me responsible for protecting her from people who would hurt her, even if those people are family. That conversation, repeated with various relatives over the following months, taught me something crucial about boundaries. They're not walls you build to keep people out. They're standards you set to keep yourself safe. Every time I refused to make excuses for Vanessa, every time I declined to help her avoid consequences, every time I chose my daughter's well-being over my sister's comfort, I was reinforcing a new version of myself that I barely recognized but was learning to respect. The woman who had spent Christmas morning trying to find middle ground with someone who was abusing her child was gone. In her place was someone who understood that there is no middle ground between protecting children and enabling their abuse, no compromise between safety and family loyalty, no way to love both the predator and their victims without betraying one of them. For the first time in 32 years, I chose not to betray the children. I chose not to betray my daughter. I chose not to betray myself. And Vanessa, sitting in a jail cell facing federal charges for crimes against children, was finally experiencing what it felt like when the sister who had always protected her decided to protect someone else instead. The media attention started small, a brief mention in the local Millbrook Herald about a federal child abuse case involving a substitute teacher. But by March, the story had taken on a life of its own, becoming a case study that legal experts, child advocacy groups, and law enforcement agencies couldn't stop talking about. What made our story different wasn't just the scope of Vanessa's crimes, but how she had used family connections and social respectability to hide in plain sight for so long. The turning point came when Dr. Sarah Chen, a nationally recognized expert in familial child abuse patterns, published an article in the American Journal of Criminal Psychology titled, "The Predator Next Door: How Family Systems Enable Systematic Child Abuse." Vanessa's case was the centerpiece of her research, a textbook example of how abusers exploit family loyalty and social connections to access victims while avoiding detection. The Hartwell case demonstrates something we've long suspected but rarely see documented so thoroughly, Dr. Chen wrote. Predators don't just rely on their own manipulation tactics. They weaponize the natural protective instincts of family members, turning love and loyalty into tools of access and concealment. The sisters' 32-year pattern of excuse-making and boundary smoothing wasn't just enabling behavior. It was an essential component of the abuser's methodology. Reading those words in print was like looking at myself in a mirror I'd never wanted to see. Dr. Chen wasn't criticizing me, exactly, but she was making it clear that my role in Vanessa's ability to continue hurting children was more significant than I had wanted to acknowledge. I wasn't just a victim of my sister's manipulation. I had been an unwitting accomplice in her systematic abuse of children. But the article also did something unexpected. It validated the choice I had made to prioritize my daughter's safety over family harmony. Dr. Chen interviewed dozens of families who had discovered abuse within their extended networks, and she found that the families who healed most successfully were the ones where protective family members were willing to completely cut contact with abusers, regardless of biological relationships. Elena Hartwell's decision to refuse all contact with her sister and to actively cooperate with federal investigators represents the gold standard for how families should respond when they discover predatory behavior in their midst, Dr. Chen concluded. Her willingness to prioritize child safety over family comfort likely prevented additional victims and should serve as a model for other families facing similar situations. The article was picked up by CNN, then by NBC, then by every major news outlet in the country. Suddenly, reporters were calling our house, wanting to interview the FBI agent who had recognized abuse patterns at a family gathering and the mother who had chosen law enforcement over family loyalty. Child advocacy organizations were asking Trevor to speak at conferences about recognizing predatory behavior in family settings. Universities were inviting me to participate in research studies about breaking cycles of enabling behavior. At first, the attention felt overwhelming and invasive. We had never wanted to be public figures, never intended for our family trauma to become a national conversation. But Dr. Mendez helped me understand that the media attention wasn't about exploiting our pain. It was about using our experience to help other families recognize similar patterns before more children got hurt. Elena, she said during one of our sessions in late March, 23 families have reached out to law enforcement because they recognize their own situations in your story. 47 teachers have reported suspected abuse cases after reading about how your sister operated in school settings. Hundreds of parents have had conversations with their children about inappropriate adult behavior because your case made them realize they needed to be more vigilant. Your willingness to speak publicly about this isn't just healing for you, it's protective for countless other children. The validation from child protection experts felt surreal after decades of being told I was too sensitive or making things complicated whenever I expressed discomfort with Vanessa's behavior around children. Suddenly, professionals who had dedicated their careers to child safety were saying that my instincts had been right all along, that the unease I had felt but couldn't articulate had been my subconscious mind recognizing predatory patterns that my conscious mind hadn't wanted to acknowledge. But the most meaningful validation came from other survivors. In April, I received a letter from a woman named Jennifer Morrison in Seattle. Her brother had been abusing children in their extended family for 15 years, using family gatherings and babysitting arrangements to access victims. Jennifer had suspected something was wrong, but had been told repeatedly by family members that she was, quote, creating drama and being paranoid whenever she tried to limit her brother's access to children. Reading about your experience gave me the courage to finally speak up, she wrote. I called Child Protective Services last week and reported everything I had observed over the years. They opened an investigation and found evidence that my brother had been abusing 6 different children in our family. 6 children who might still be suffering if your story hadn't helped me understand that protecting family reputation isn't more important than protecting children. Letters like Jennifer's arrived almost daily throughout the spring and summer. Mothers who had recognized similar patterns in their own families and finally found the courage to report them. Fathers who had realized that their discomfort with certain relatives wasn't unfounded paranoia, but legitimate protective instincts. Grandparents who had stopped making excuses for adult children, whose behavior around grandchildren had always felt off, but had never been named as potentially dangerous. Each letter was a reminder that speaking publicly about our experience wasn't just therapeutic for our family, it was literally saving other children from abuse. The shame I had felt about my years of enabling behavior was slowly being replaced by a sense of purpose. I couldn't undo the decades I had spent protecting Vanessa from consequences, but I could use what I had learned to help other families recognize and respond to similar situations more quickly. The most public validation came in June, when the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children invited me to speak at their annual conference in Washington, D.C. Standing on that stage, looking out at an audience of law enforcement officers, social workers, prosecutors, and child advocates, I felt something I had never experienced in 32 years of being Vanessa's sister: pride in the choice I had made to protect children, instead of protecting an abuser. For most of my adult life, I told the audience, I believed that family loyalty meant never giving up on people, never cutting contact, never letting consequences interfere with relationships. I thought that loving my sister meant protecting her from the results of her choices, even when those choices involved hurting children. I was wrong. Love doesn't mean enabling harm. Family doesn't mean sacrificing children's safety for adult comfort. And loyalty to someone who abuses children isn't loyalty at all, it's complicity. The standing ovation that followed wasn't for me exactly. It was for every parent in that audience who had made the hard choice to prioritize child safety over family expectations. Every professional who had reported suspected abuse despite pressure to quote, keep it in the family. Every survivor who had found the courage to speak up, despite knowing it would change everything. But perhaps the most important validation came from an unexpected source: Lily herself. One evening in July, as I was tucking her into bed, she looked up at me with those serious brown eyes and said, "Mama, I'm glad you didn't let Aunt Vanessa come back to our house." "Why is that, sweetheart?" I asked, my heart racing with the possibility that she might share something she had been holding inside for months. "Because she was mean to kids," Lily said simply. "And you protected me from mean people. That's what mamas are supposed to do." Out of the mouths of babes. My 5-year-old daughter had understood something that had taken me 32 years to learn. Protecting children from people who hurt them isn't optional, even when those people are family. It's not complicated or controversial or requiring careful consideration of competing loyalties. It's basic, fundamental, non-negotiable. The world had validated my choice to prioritize my daughter's safety over my sister's freedom. Experts had validated my decision to cooperate with law enforcement instead of protecting family reputation. Other survivors had validated my understanding that enabling abuse makes you complicit in harm. But Lily's simple, clear-eyed gratitude for being protected from someone who was mean to kids, that was the validation that mattered most. Because at the end of the day, all the media attention and professional recognition and survivor solidarity in the world meant nothing compared to knowing that my daughter felt safe in her own home, protected by a mother who had finally learned to choose her safety over everyone else's comfort. The little girl who had been slapped on Christmas morning by someone who was supposed to love her now knew, with absolute certainty, that her mother would never let that happen again. And that knowledge, that trust, was worth every family relationship I had lost, every uncomfortable conversation I had endured, every moment of public scrutiny I had weathered to get here. The call came on September 15th, 8 months and 21 days after Christmas morning. I was in the kitchen making Lily's lunch for her first day of kindergarten, humming while I cut the crusts off her peanut butter sandwich, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Something in my gut told me not to answer it, but something else, some stubborn fragment of the person I used to be, made me pick up. "Elena, thank God." The voice was hoarse, desperate, barely recognizable as my sister's. "They're transferring me to federal prison next week. I need to see you before I go. I need to explain things properly, need you to understand what really happened." My hands went still on the sandwich. For 8 months, I had successfully avoided direct contact with Vanessa, had built my life around the certainty that I would never have to hear her voice again, never have to navigate the manipulation and guilt and twisted logic that had controlled me for 3 decades. Now here she was, reaching through the walls I had built, trying to pull me back into the chaos I had fought so hard to escape. "How did you get this number?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Elena, please don't hang up. I know you're angry. I know you think you understand what kind of person I am, but there are things you don't know. Context you're missing. I made mistakes, serious mistakes. But I'm not the monster everyone is making me out to be." There it was, the same pattern, the same words, the same manipulation techniques she had been using on me since we were children. The minimization of mistakes instead of crimes. The suggestion that I was missing crucial information that would change everything if I just listened to her side of the story. The implication that everyone else was wrong, that the evidence was somehow misleading, that she was the real victim in this situation. But this time, I could hear it. After months of therapy, months of learning about manipulation tactics and abuse patterns and the psychology of predators, I could recognize every technique as she deployed it. It was like watching a magician perform tricks when you already knew how all the illusions worked. Impressive in its execution, but powerless to fool you once you understood the methods. "Vanessa," I said quietly, "there were 23 children. You documented what you did to them in journals. You wrote down your techniques for hurting kids and getting away with it. There is no context that makes that acceptable. There is no explanation that makes any of this my fault for not understanding you better." The silence that followed was long enough that I wondered if she had hung up. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Less desperate, more calculating. I recognized this shift, too, from childhood. This was Vanessa realizing that her usual approach wasn't working, adjusting her strategy to try a different angle of attack. "Elena, I need you to think about what you're doing to our family legacy. Mom and Dad would be heartbroken to see us like this, to see you abandoning me when I need you most. Is this really what they would have wanted? For their daughters to turn on each other when things got difficult? Our parents." She was invoking our dead parents' hypothetical disappointment in me as a way to manipulate me into supporting her. The audacity of it was breathtaking. using the memory of the people who had raised us to be kind and protective as a weapon to convince me to protect someone who had systematically abused children. Our parents, I said, my voice getting stronger, would have wanted me to protect Lily. They would have wanted me to protect all the children you hurt. They would have been horrified by what you did, and they would have supported my decision to prioritize child safety over family loyalty. Another long pause. When she spoke again, I could hear tears in her voice. Real tears, probably, but tears of self-pity rather than remorse. Tears for her own situation rather than for the children she had traumatized. Elena, I'm begging you, come see me before they transfer me. Let me explain what really happened with Lily, what was really going through my mind that morning. You're the only person who knows the real me, who understands the pressure I was under, the stress I was dealing with. Everyone else just sees the headlines and the court documents, but you know I'm more than the worst thing I've ever done. The worst thing she'd ever done. She was still framing 23 victims as a single bad day, still minimizing systematic abuse as a momentary lapse in judgment, still trying to convince me that knowing her well meant I should excuse her crimes rather than hold her accountable for them. Vanessa, I said, and my voice was completely calm now, completely certain, I do know the real you. The real you spent years planning how to hurt children and get away with it. The real you documented techniques for causing pain to kids who trusted you. The real you used our family gatherings as hunting grounds for victims. The real you manipulated me for 32 years into providing you with access and cover for abusing children. That is who you really are. The crying stopped abruptly. When she spoke again, her voice was cold, sharp, familiar. This was the sister who had criticized everything I did, who had found fault with every choice I made, who had spent decades making me feel small and wrong and inadequate. Fine, Elena, be self-righteous. Be the perfect mother who never makes mistakes, who never has a moment of losing control. But remember this conversation when you're sitting in your perfect house with your perfect husband and your precious daughter. Remember that you chose strangers over family, chose headlines over loyalty, chose to destroy someone who loved you over forgiveness and healing. Strangers over family. She was calling her victims children she had systematically abused for years, strangers. She was reframing my choice to protect children as a betrayal of her love, as if abusing kids was somehow an expression of caring about me. The twisted logic was so familiar, so perfectly Vanessa, that I almost laughed. I didn't choose strangers over family, I said. I chose my daughter over her abuser. I chose 23 children over the person who hurt them. I chose child safety over adult comfort. And if you think that was the wrong choice, if you think protecting victims instead of protecting you makes me a bad sister, then you've just proven that I made exactly the right decision. Elena. No, I interrupted, and the word came out with more force than I had intended. I'm done listening to you. I'm done being manipulated by you. I'm done letting you use our shared history as a weapon against my better judgment. You don't get to call me anymore. You don't get to write to me anymore. You don't get access to my thoughts, my emotions, or my family ever again. You can't just cut me off forever. I'm your sister. When I get out of prison, when I've served my time and proven that I've changed, you can't just pretend I don't exist. When she got out of prison. The assumption that there would be an after, that time served would somehow erase the damage she had done. That she could emerge from incarceration expecting family relationships to resume as if nothing had happened. The entitlement was staggering, but it was also illuminating. Vanessa, I said, my voice quiet but absolute, you will never have access to my daughter again. You will never be welcome in my home again. You will never be part of our family celebrations, our holidays, our lives. Not in 5 years, not in 10 years, not ever. You can serve your time, you can take all the classes and therapy and programs you want, but you will never again be trusted around children in our family. That is not negotiable. That is not conditional. That is permanent. The silence that followed was different from the earlier pauses. This wasn't her calculating her next approach or adjusting her strategy. This was the silence of someone realizing that a door had been closed that would never open again, that a relationship had ended that would never be repaired, that consequences had been imposed that would never be lifted. "Elena," she said finally, her voice small and broken, "you're really going to abandon me completely? After everything we've been through together, everything we've shared, you're going to act like I'm dead to you?" "I'm not acting like you're dead," I replied. "I'm acting like you're someone who abused children, including my child, for years. I'm acting like you're someone who used our family connections to access victims. I'm acting like you're someone who documented your techniques for hurting kids in journals. Because that's exactly who you are." I hung up before she could respond, then immediately blocked the number she had called from. Then I sat down at my kitchen table, my hands shaking slightly, and stared at Lily's half-made sandwich, trying to process what had just happened. For 8 months, I had wondered if I would be strong enough to maintain my boundaries if Vanessa made direct contact. I had worried that hearing her voice would trigger the old patterns, that her familiar manipulation techniques would find their way past the walls I had built around my new understanding of who she really was. But I had passed the test. I had heard every manipulation, recognized every technique, and responded from a place of clarity rather than conditioning. I had chosen my daughter's safety over my sister's comfort one final time, and this time I knew it was truly final. The woman who had spent 32 years making excuses for inexcusable behavior was gone. In her place was someone who understood that protecting children requires protecting them from everyone who would hurt them, regardless of biology, regardless of history, regardless of family loyalty or social pressure, or the comfortable fiction that all family relationships can be healed with enough forgiveness and understanding. Some relationships can't be healed. Some boundaries can't be crossed again. Some choices are permanent. And some tests, once passed, never have to be taken again. It's been 18 months since that Christmas morning, and I'm sitting in the same living room where it all happened, but everything has changed. The Christmas tree corner now holds Lily's art easel, where she creates drawings that no one will ever dismiss or set aside without comment. The coffee table where Vanessa's purse fell is now covered with Lily's kindergarten homework, spelling tests, and math worksheets that we celebrate together like tiny victories. The couch where I used to sit making excuses for inexcusable behavior now holds a different version of me entirely, a mother who has learned that protection isn't negotiable, that love without boundaries isn't love at all, and that some doors, once closed, should never be opened again. Lily is 7 now, thriving in 2nd grade, her confidence restored, and her natural joy undimmed by that terrible morning. She still remembers what happened. Dr. Mendez says it's important not to pretend it didn't occur, but she remembers it now as the day her mama chose to protect her, rather than the day someone hurt her. She knows that Aunt Vanessa was someone who is mean to children, and that adults who are mean to children don't get to be around families anymore. It's a simple, clear explanation that makes sense to a 7-year-old mind, and it's given her a framework for understanding that some people aren't safe, even if they're related to you. The ripple effects of our story continue to expand in ways I never could have imagined. The Hartwell case, as it's known in legal circles, has been cited in over 200 court decisions involving familial child abuse. Law enforcement agencies across the country now include training on recognizing systematic abuse patterns in family settings as part of their standard curriculum. Social workers use our experience as a case study in how family dynamics can enable predatory behavior, and how healing begins when protective family members choose victims over abusers. But the impact that matters most to me happens in smaller, quieter moments. It happens when someone approaches me after one of my speaking engagements and says, "Your story gave me the courage to report my uncle who was hurting kids at family gatherings." It happens when a teacher emails to tell me that recognizing the signs of systematic abuse helped her identify and report a colleague who was targeting students. It happens when a mother writes to say that learning about manipulation tactics helped her protect her children from a relative whose behavior had always made her uncomfortable, but she'd never been able to name as dangerous. Each of these moments reminds me that the shame I carried for 32 years about enabling Vanessa's behavior wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of understanding how to use that painful knowledge to protect other children. I can't undo the decades I spent smoothing over warning signs and making excuses for someone who was systematically abusing kids. But I can use what I learned from that experience to help other families recognize similar patterns before they escalate to the point where more children get hurt. Trevor's career has taken an unexpected turn as well. His recognition of abuse patterns during a family gathering has made him a sought-after expert in identifying predatory behavior in domestic settings. He's consulted on dozens of cases where family members suspected abuse but weren't sure how to proceed, helping them understand the difference between normal family conflict and systematic victimization. His law enforcement colleagues have started calling him when they need help understanding how predators use family dynamics to access and silence victims. Elena, he told me recently as we watched Lily play in our backyard, what happened that Christmas morning was the worst and best thing that could have happened to our family. Worst because we learned that someone we trusted was hurting children. Best because we learned it in time to stop her from hurting more children, including our own daughter. The distinction matters. We didn't cause Vanessa's crimes by enabling her access to children, but we did end them by choosing to prioritize child safety over family comfort. We didn't create the situation, but we took responsibility for stopping it once we understood what was really happening. And that difference between causation and response, between guilt and responsibility, between shame and action, has been crucial to our healing. I've learned that there's a difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, between letting go of anger and letting someone back into your life. I forgave Vanessa, not because she deserved it or asked for it or changed enough to earn it, but because carrying hatred for someone who had already damaged so many lives felt like letting her continue to cause harm. But forgiveness doesn't mean access. Forgiveness doesn't mean trust. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending that someone who systematically abused children should ever be around children again. People sometimes ask me if I miss my sister, if I regret losing that relationship, if I ever wonder what our family might have looked like if we had handled things differently. The answer is complex because it requires separating the sister I thought I had from the person she actually was. I miss the idea of Vanessa, the concept of having a sister who shared my childhood memories, who understood our family dynamics, who would be part of Lily's extended family support system. But I don't miss the reality of Vanessa, someone who used those shared memories as manipulation tools, who exploited our family dynamics to access victims, who would have continued hurting children if she had remained part of Lily's life. The person I thought I was losing when I cut contact with Vanessa was largely a fiction I had created to make sense of decades of concerning behavior. The real Vanessa, the one revealed by her journals and documented by federal investigators, was someone I never should have protected in the first place. Letting go of her meant letting go of a relationship that had been built on my willingness to ignore warning signs and excuse concerning behavior, which wasn't really a healthy relationship worth preserving anyway. What I've gained by choosing boundaries over family loyalty is immeasurable. I've gained a daughter who knows she can trust me to protect her from anyone who might hurt her, even if that person is family. I've gained a marriage strengthened by shared commitment to child safety over social comfort. I've gained a sense of purpose built around protecting children rather than protecting adults who harm children. I've gained clarity about my own values, my own priorities, my own definition of what family really means. Real family, I've learned, isn't determined by biology or shared history or legal relationships. Real family is built by people who show up for each other in crisis, who protect the vulnerable members of the group, who choose love over convenience and safety over comfort. Real family means that when someone hurts a child, everyone rallies around the child rather than making excuses for the adult. The family we've built since Christmas morning 2023 is smaller than the one we had before, but it's infinitely stronger. It includes Trevor's parents, who flew out immediately when they heard what happened and who have become Lily's primary grandparent figures. It includes my cousin Rachel, who has become the sister I thought I had in Vanessa, someone who celebrates Lily's achievements, who supports our family through difficulties, who would never make excuses for someone who hurt a child. It includes friends who became family when they proved their commitment to protecting children over protecting adult feelings. And it includes a growing network of other families who have faced similar situations, parents who have had to choose between family loyalty and child safety, survivors who have found the courage to speak up about abuse in their own families, professionals who work every day to protect children from the adults who should be caring for them. This chosen family, built around shared values rather than shared DNA, has taught me what real love looks like. Real love protects the vulnerable. Real love sets boundaries when necessary. Real love chooses truth over comfort, safety over convenience, children over adults who would harm them. If you're listening to this story and recognizing patterns in your own family, if you're seeing warning signs you've been taught to ignore or excuse, if you're feeling torn between family loyalty and child safety, I want you to know something. Choosing to protect children is always the right choice, even when it's the hardest choice, even when it means losing relationships you thought you needed, even when it means standing alone against family pressure and social expectations. Children can't protect themselves from adults who want to hurt them. They need us to be brave enough to see what's really happening, strong enough to name it as abuse, and committed enough to choose their safety over our comfort. They need us to understand that family loyalty, when it protects predators, becomes complicity in abuse. Most importantly, they need us to understand that love isn't keeping families together at any cost. Love is keeping children safe at any cost. That's the lesson that terrible Christmas morning taught me. That's the wisdom that came from the hardest decision I've ever had to make. And that's the truth I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. Real love protects. Real love chooses safety. Real love, when it comes to children, is never conditional on adult comfort or family convenience or social expectations. Real love does whatever it takes to keep kids safe, even when it means saying goodbye to someone you thought you loved. Even when it means choosing a smaller family built on truth over a larger one built on silence. Even when it means learning that the most loving thing you can do is close a door and never open it again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.